My name is Reverend Willie, Bodrick II, and I'm proud to serve as the 14th senior pastor here at the historic 12th Baptist Church, and we're so grateful to have you here today. Praise God, from whom all blessings flow. As we do for everything that we do here at TBC, we open with a word of prayer. So would you bow with me? Most gracious and wise God, we come to you simply to say thank you, for you're good and you're worthy to be praised. And God, we thank you for this night where we will gather together to share, to learn, to remember, to look forward. And God, we thank you for Gayle being with us on this night. And we thank you for the work that he has put together and put out into the world for a time such as this. So as we gather together, we pray that your sweet, sweet spirit resonate in this space and in all the spaces that we call sanctuary. And God, we ask that this conversation rejuvenates us, encourages us, and helps us to continue to fight for liberation. We love you, and we praise you, and we thank you for this time that we have together. In Jesus Christ's name we pray, amen. Amen. We welcome you to the historic 12th Baptist Church, where we are a church of love, light, life, and liberation. And we are liberating all of God's people through the love of Jesus Christ. And we are so excited to be here on this night. You are in a sacred space. We are a church that has a great history of abolitionism, a church of moral courage, a church that has an unyielding belief that freedom is both God's sacred gift and God's sacred charge. We are excited this year because this year we celebrate 220 years since the first African Baptist Church and 185 years as 12th Baptist Church. And our mantra for this year is that we are built to last. Today we come together because we come back into a place where generations have gathered. Black folks and folks who care about freedom have always gathered in sacred spaces and began to do the work of imagining futures that are possible. And we come tonight to continue that great work that we've been called to here at 12th Baptist Church through real stories of our history. In a time where there's been an assault and attack on the history of our people in this country, it's important that we continue to lift up stories of resilience, of overcoming, and stories of possibility. Tonight, in this pulpit, I'm here with another PK, one who is a storyteller of rare clarity, of depth, and of conviction. Gayle is the award-winning journalist, a writer whose work refuses easy narratives and forces us to see race, identity, and history with fresh and necessary eyes. He's a contributing writer to the New York Times Magazine, and his journalism has been honored with some of the most prestigious recognitions in the literary world, including the Matthew Power Literary Reporting Award, the PEN America Writing for Justice Fellowship, the Center for Fiction Emerging Writers Fellowship, the New American Fellowship, and the Radcliffe Institute Fellowship, among others. His writing has been featured in the New York Times, The Guardian, The Atlantic, The Boston Globe, The New Republic, The Root, Three Penny Review, and the Los Angeles Review of Books, and so many more. His work has been anthologized as a notable essay in the 2019 Best American Essays, marking him not only as a journalist, but as a literary force in this country. In addition to his writing career, Caleb also serves as an associate professor at Northeastern University, where he continues shaping minds, challenging assumptions, and nurturing the next generation of truth tellers. And we want to celebrate Northeastern and all the work that they have done to make this night possible as well. Caleb's academic journey is stellar. He's a Truman Scholar, a graduate of the University of Oklahoma. He also is a graduate of the University of Oxford. And he also holds a Master of Business Administration and Master's in Public Policy from Harvard Business School and the Harvard Kennedy School, where he attended as a Paul and Daisy Soros Fellow. Caleb is also the author of We Refuse to Forget, an award-winning book. It's a true story telling of Black Creek's American identity and power. And tonight, we gather around his newest and most remarkable book, Black Moses, a saga of ambition and the fight for a black state. It's a work that is not only timely, not only urgent, but personally, I believe it's necessary. I am delighted to share that this book is currently a finalist for the 2025 New England Book Award for Nonfiction and is longlisted for the National Book Award. In sports, we say you're in your prime, brother. He's a thinker. He is a narrative shaper. He is a truth teller. And at 12th Baptist Church, we're thankful for truth tellers. Tonight, I want to introduce to some and welcome my good friend and brother, Caleb Gayle. Come on, give him a big round of applause. Before we jump into these questions around this amazing book, I was telling my wife the other day, this is probably one of the best books I've read in a long time. And that's a big feat for someone who likes to read a lot of books. But before we go into this conversation, I think it is important that we pause and just acknowledge where we are. Space matters as we talk about narratives, not just physically, not just historically, but here spiritually. 12th Baptist Church is not just a venue for tonight's conversation and dialogue with Caleb, but this is a sanctuary that is a living monument in black history. Our history is essential to us, and we believe deeply that if we don't tell our story, somebody else will. And that's really what this conversation is about tonight, about the broader struggle for liberation in this country. And Caleb talks about this, church, page 32. You know I highlighted that in the book as he explores some of the Anthony Burns conversation and treatment that he does in this book, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in depth later. But it speaks towards the legacy and lineage of this church, and that the spaces that we gather in, the movements, the migrations, the moral reckonings that this book actually brings to life. This is a church that was founded by people who refused to be segregated, a church whose spirit of self-determination anchored itself, a church who was one of the hubs on the Underground Railroad, and during the Fugitive Slave Act, we were known as the Fugitive Slave Church. It's a church that has been focused on civil rights and continuing to push the conversation forward. It is where they had the after party when the Emancipation Proclamation was signed. It was a place where Douglass and so many others stood, a place where Dr. King was nurtured under Reverend William Hunter Hester right here in this church. And so we honor this space that we are in. And as we gather to discuss Black Moses, we do so in this sanctified space of resistance. And so that's the way I think we should open this conversation, because I believe, Caleb, your work honors that legacy and that lineage that our church and many other black spaces and institutions settle in. And you began this book really pushing us to really think critically around what does black freedom and what does black ambition mean for us. And as you walk us into this scene, as you open this book, I guess my first question is, what drew you to this character of McCabe? How did you get to him? I know you're a guy from Oklahoma, so
it helps.
It helps a little bit.
Yeah.
Tell us the journey of getting to the McCabe story.
Yeah, I mean, so first, I think like if any of you are in need of being introduced anywhere, you should just kind of pay Reverend Bodrick for his services. I gave him none of that material. So that is something I recommend, and also, of course, extending my thanks to the folks from Northeastern, especially the Africana Studies department, some of my students who are here. Especially the students who actually helped to make this event happen, like Janelle, and Evelyn, and Claire. Really appreciate you all, and of course this church that has so warmly welcomed us. So I think, you know, I kind of cynically and ironically said that being from Oklahoma kind of helped. Yeah. In part because the narrative of this guy, Edward McCabe, and the people that he led, the thousands of black people who migrated in from various parts of the country, primarily the American South, at the tail end of Reconstruction, when it felt as if whatever faint accomplishments that had been gained were that much more untethered from permanence. I say it ironically in part because in Oklahoma, we didn't learn about these sorts of folks, right? It wasn't common to hear the word McCabe. I never heard the word McCabe. I initially, when I first heard of him, assumed that he was Irish. In fact, the very first time I saw him in any newspaper archive, it was said that they thought that he purposely changed his name from one of an African one. They said because they assumed that being Irish was somehow better than being black. So that was the first time I encountered him formally in the archives. But for me, I remember I was becoming a member of a fraternity. I'll forgive you for the decisions you made.
I knew we were gonna get there.
Becoming acute, I still respect members of Omega Psi Phi, but I was becoming a member of Alpha Phi Alpha, the first and the only. But I was in Langston, Oklahoma, which is the town that McCabe had founded. Yeah. And Langston, Oklahoma also is home to the furthest west HBCU, Langston University, and that's where we were formally and legally going over. And while I was there, I remember we had to go to Guthrie, Oklahoma, which was just next to Langston, which at the time was the territorial capital of Oklahoma before it became a state. And in the very middle of Main Street, there's a placard that sits above what was once McCabe's office, and it said, "Here sat Edward McCabe," and it had like a short little ditty. And I remember reading it and thinking to myself, oh, it's convenient that an Irishman would bestow upon all these black people the opportunity to have their own state. That's cute. Because when I moved to Oklahoma, I distinctly remember my first encounter with history in a more formal way was in 4th grade, and I'm gonna wrap up my long answer in this, which is just to kind of confirm how ironic it would be that I would say that being from Oklahoma helped learning McCabe. In fact, being from Oklahoma obscured my ability to find out about McCabe and the thousands of people he led. Because when I got there, I distinctly remember we were doing it was everyone, social studies, geometry, history, they all gathered us together, took us to the back lot. And in this part of Oklahoma, this is Muskogee Creek Nation land, right? One of the quote-unquote 5 civilized tribes we used to call them. Anyways, we all line up. We all are given those red flyer wagons. I remember the red flyer wagons, like the real fancy ones. Yeah. It was red. I mean, this is a black church. Y'all talk back. But like we all given those. We were given protractors. We were given these like wooden stakes. We were lined up, and all of the kids who they thought looked, as they would say, Indian, they gathered, and they told them, go sit on different portions of it. Make sure that you would sit, as they would say, Indian style. Yep. And then all of the other kids are going to line up with these wagons, and they're going to stake out their land. They're going to do the land run over and over and over again. Yeah. So, you know, that was my first introduction to Oklahoma's history, was reenacting one of the more violent moments in kind of the American West's history. Yeah. So, like, how could I have known about McCabe if all that was left of him was a plaque? In a part of the state that has been intentionally underfunded, in a state where all I learned about was this kind of hagiographic view of people who really came to settle. And so, like, how could I have known? So that's how I came to know about this person, in part because I was haunted by that plaque that I saw at 18 years old when I was becoming a member of the best fraternity in the world. And those were the first moments. And as a writer, and as someone who tends to write more so journalistically about history, I have a tendency of allowing myself to get haunted until at such a time as Imani Perry would say to me, she would say, no, Caleb, it's time for you to haunt that past. And so that's when the turn came, when I decided that it was time to no longer allow this past to obscure my view of it, but rather to haunt it such that I could clarify the view for others.
No, I like that. I like this notion of haunting. You know, what jumped off before I even opened the book, I remember you giving to me, was Black Moses. Mm-hmm. The Moses motif.
Yeah.
You know, it is central to who we are, central to Black liberation narratives.
Yep.
You know, when I first saw it, I didn't get to open it yet, and I was like, man, he about to write about Tubman? Is he gonna write? You know, because the concept and the motif has been so central to Black liberation. Reading about Edward McCabe, I understand why you get there, and I think there's a beautiful line that you say. I don't want to give a spoiler to the book, but as he comes to this demise, it's this notion of the promised land that he never gets to, similar to Moses.
Correct.
And so could you just kind of help us in this sacred space kind of unpack, how did you get there?
Yeah.
From a character who, interestingly, has many parallels to Moses.
Oh, definitely, right? Like, there's I think there are usually like, aside from not wanting to get sued by the Isaac Hayes estate for his album, which I love, it's in my office. My students have taken a look at it. I think that we have a tendency of obscuring the beginning and ending of Moses and emphasizing kind of this middle portion, which resounds, or at least has this victorious ring to it, right? The beginning of his life is one of not being part of the story of struggle that his family came from. And likewise with McCabe, we end up seeing that, like, he lives a pretty charmed life, right? Like, he goes to boarding schools, he is around these parts, he worked on Wall Street, he was an investor before that was something one would usually say at an investment bank, which was still relatively an early convention at that time. He goes to Chicago, and for those of you who were born before 1994, this will ring a bell, but like Marshall Field, right, the department store company, right, he advised them, he advised Potter Palmer, the king of state, the hotel king of State Street, because he was known for just setting up hotels in rising Chicago. So he was living a different life than the majority of people who shared the hue of his skin. Yet and still, he found himself, like Henry Highland Garnett said, the gulf between us is not wide. Despite the fact that it might feel that way. We might trick ourselves even in this moment to believe that, like, we are sitting here in our nice suits and ties and our nice shoes, and somehow that makes us different than the other Negroes, right? I think this is kind of the usual kind of narrative that we try to kind of imbue on ourselves. So we don't focus on that part of Moses, but that part seemed quite akin to McCabe's experience. The other part that was interesting is that McCabe was promising land he could not see, and land that was very far from promise and was all but contested, right? When you think about it, Oklahoma at that time was created to be a laboratorial experiment for the United States to figure out, like, what do we do with our indigenous populations, our Black people, our poor white immigrants? Let's just put them in one place, tell them that some of them have warrants and rights to the land, to treaties that really aren't going to exist for too much longer, all of which will be broken. And then on top of that, we're going to tell them that all of you can achieve your dreams there, only to ensure that everyone's dreams would collide. So to some extent, for me, Moses is malleable. That word, or not word, that name can be applied to a lot of people. That's why the most common question that I get on tour is, oh, you must be talking about Marcus Garvey, right? Even though Garvey comes after McCabe, Marcus Garvey and some of his lieutenants make appearances in this book. But I think the last part that really kind of was the moment that I realized that I had a book was I remember reading this guy being interviewed in St. Louis, Missouri, by someone from the St. Louis Globe Democrat in 1876. The black man was an formerly enslaved person who escaped with thousands of others in what was called the Exoduster movement from the American South into primarily Kansas, but they would stop usually in Missouri because they would take these really circuitous routes. Sometimes they would see a package ship like this guy did, and a package ship was meant for carrying leaflets of mail, right? And so he would jump on it, kick off the mail, hide, so that he wouldn't tip over the boat, right? Yeah. So this is the road that he's traveled to freedom, and then he's in St. Louis, he's being interviewed, and the guy from St. Louis Globe Democrat asked him, like, what are you doing here, right? Like, do you know this state was not really fond of black people? It's still not, it's not the best place for y'all to be. Why are you here? And his response is so singular. He said, look, I've tried Jackson, I've tried Lincoln, I've tried Washington. He just lists all these presidents. Yeah. And then he says, but every man is his own Moses. Yep. And at that moment, I realized that this concept of Moses was not necessarily for a singular kind of triumphant person that the historical record deemed to be interesting and appropriate. So that's when I knew that Black Moses was going to be the title it had to go with, and that's when I knew there was a book to write.
Yeah, no, I think that's very interesting, because the first thing I capture on McCabe is that he doesn't experience slavery.
He does not.
His parents didn't experience it. And
exactly.
So I see this character sort of having these parallels, but feeling compelled to come up with a solution, as well as the experiences in which he's engaged, as he identifies with that. And so I thought that was interesting.
And a hefty dose of narcissism, because it wasn't just that he was saying that, like, I think I need a plan, and I'm going to humbly recede to the background, become wallpaper. No, he also was like, I'll be the governor, the senator, the congressman, the clerk. I mean, whatever you need me to be, I'll do it. Yeah.
But I think that speaks towards Black imagination, right?
Yeah.
Right? Because, I think while maybe arrogant, it may have been pure in good faith of this reimagining of what could be, right? Much of that earlier half of the book, it talks about these sort of failed attempts, right? And I've been really in this real tension of, like, the constant failed attempts of creating the promised land, right? Or ascribing to the promised land. I was reading that portion of the sister from Kentucky, who ends up having to leave because her husband's still stuck in indentured servitude in Kentucky, and she has to walk all the way there. And then when they get there, they're like, "Where is this land they promised us?"
And then they point it out, and she's like, "Is that what?" And then she begins to cry.
Yeah. And so, I'm thinking really critically about ambition and survival.
Yeah.
And how does McCabe sort of force us to grapple with both what we think is ambition, maybe the stories we have to tell ourselves, and how does that kind of rhyme with the reality that we have to experience?
Sure, yeah. So I think I initially thought that when I signed the book contract, right, my editor was like, "Okay, cool, this is what we're doing." And the book proposal had said this thing starts like 1890. My guy is like about to walk into Oklahoma, right? This is where the book initially started. And then we ended up realizing that would be so like void of context. But then, then you also have to make sure that in providing context, you do so in a way that's narratively sweeping, so as to not put the reader to sleep. And that's like a task that's difficult for someone in academia, right? Like, because we want to give you all context and then be like, "Did you know there's a story here?" Right? So for me, what I needed to do was kind of show how McCabe was choosing an inheritance to some extent, right? And I'm cribbing off of Saidiya Hartman when I say that, right? Like, he essentially was saying, look, we ended up writing the book such that we would showcase all the failures, but then how well-funded the failures were. So in this book, when you read it, you're going to go to Haiti, you're going to go to Colombia, you're going to go to Liberia, you're going to go to Canada, you're going to go to a lot of places before you actually get to Kansas and Oklahoma, in part because the United States government would hear a proposal, because back then, for those of you who like watch Death by Lightning on Netflix, like it was really easy to get the audience of a president at that time, right? So like a guy named Bernard Koch, who was a failed tobacco salesman, recent German immigrant from New Orleans, had walked up to President Lincoln and said, "Hey, I have an idea. If you get Congress to give me $600K, I will solve your black problem. Like, you're such a benevolent president. If you just give me $600K, I got you. And then he would go over from that to then go to he said, hey, President Lincoln, to a bunch of people who were incredibly wealthy financiers in New York, people who gave us the Met, people who gave us people like Winston Churchill, people who gave us those sorts of kind of powerful institution-changing figures. And he said, look, President Lincoln's already given me the money. Give me some more money, and I'm going to take all these people to Haiti off this island called Cow Island, and I got you. You never have to worry about any other black person ever. Don't worry. You don't have to worry about liberating them. We're going to take the ones who escaped from slavery. Those ones we're going to take them to Haiti. Then he says, look, I'm going to lie to you. I've never talked to the folks in Haiti, but I promise you they'll be excited to give them, these black people, citizenship once they get there, right? Like this really convoluted thing. And that's just one example that you're going to get, like one small vignette. You're going to see them try and ship black people to what is now Mexico. You're going to see them ship them a lot of different places because the goal wasn't necessarily to provide liberation and abundance. The goal was to just rid America of a problem. And then on top of that, all of those people get funded, opportunities get funneled their way, and then McCabe assumes that his scheme would likewise get the same sort of result. And so, not to paint him in this picture of perfection, he comes up with a plan. And bonus points if you thought of the name, it wasn't the freedom and liberation opportunity for all people in the territories in cooperation with indigenous populations, period. That was not the plan. The plan was called the Negro Colonization Scheme of Oklahoma. He planned to be a colonizer. He would raise funds to colonize, right? That to some extent, like the nature of McCabe and his question of ambition and survival was, well, I just need to use the master's tools in order to craft an ambition that might be achievable, a plan that might be achievable, which is sad, right? Like that's the lengths he went to. And then once he presented said plans, because he had audience with multiple presidents, they said, oh, wow, that's great. Be better if you were actually Irish, because then I could say he's white. I mean, some of them would literally say those things to him. So to me, the question of ambition and survival and how McCabe kind of represents it is one that in many cases might feel very Sisyphean, right? Like he's just rolling this boulder up a hill only to have the gods push that boulder back down on him. But for me, and I know I'm in church, but I'm going to cite a little bit of Camus, just a little bit, right? He would look at that and say, well, it might seem foolhardy and painful to persist in the trying, but it's in that trying that he found some semblance of purpose. And so to me, I always look at McCabe and think very much about the seaman's prayer, where the seaman's out in the middle of the ocean. He says, oh my God, the ocean is so vast, but my boat is so small. And I would think of my grandfather, who was a preacher, and he would just say, row the boat. So to some extent, I always found something really interesting and gravitating about McCabe, because it seemed as if he was, not so much that he was unconcerned about the vastness of the ocean, the vastness of the problems that he was trying to wade through. It was that he knew that survival was not necessarily, ambition and survival were twinned experiences for people who had accepted that every man would be their own Moses. And so as such, he just continued to row the boat. And to some extent, I wish, you said it was timely, the book. And that's what the New York Times said, it's timely. And the Washington Post said it's timely. And I thought this was going to be my escape, my departure from the current moment, because the current moment sucks. But it was odd to see that perhaps the thing that resonated most with people was that the trying doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be persistent. And in that way, I found such significant interest, right? Like curiosity that almost seemed never insatiable becomes somewhat sated in telling the story of McCabe.
Yeah, I mean, I think the New York Times may say it's timely for different reasons than me. But I think it was timely in the sense that we are struggling with what does future look like? What does purpose look like? What does Black liberation look like? And we've seen these attempts. I mean, you talk about it, the the different venues that the book takes you and different locales, and to see all of these efforts sort of with great intention subside. Some of it due to just the threat of what could be.
Sure.
Right, because, you know, the projection of a future idea sometimes is threatening to the habitus that you're in, right, or the frameworks. I wonder, how do we begin to reimagine and not make those mistakes as we're in a moment that it's hard to see clearly? I have a little grace for McCabe, because I think he was in a moment where it may have been hard to see clearly, right?
Sure.
And not quite understand. I think the book talks about many folks who were like, I ain't got no better option than this, right? Like, this is all I got. You know, like, we done tried here, we done went there.
Yep.
I refuse to go back to the South.
Yep.
The West has to be some type of promised land. And I wonder, you know, how do we continue to unpack? Because I'm pretty sure I'm just reading the book, but understanding history, what he was proposing was radical.
It was.
To a lot of folks.
Yep.
Ambitious and radical.
Yep.
And what does that mean to be radical in this moment?
Yeah. Yeah. What does it mean to be radical in this moment? Boy, that's a loaded question. But I think I can try and distill it like this. I was talking with oh goodness, she wrote this wonderful book called Queen Mother about Audley Moore. What was that? Ashley Farmer. So Ashley Farmer is a professor at UT Austin. She and I were in conversation in Austin, and someone asked a very similar question. And one of the things that Ashley and I found really interesting for her, Audley, in a different time period, and for McCabe with me, is the lived reality of their radical proposals, right? Like it was not in any way divorced from kind of the practical politicking. In fact, it was deemed by some to be overly aggressive because it was so tactile. So McCabe's like proposal was not like, it was not so esoteric and lofty and, inaccessible. It was, if we can just get enough black people in these 6 counties that have now been terribly emptied, essentially, then they won't be able to tell us no, right? The question wasn't posed, he wasn't posing a question like, do you want to believe in a better tomorrow, right? He wasn't offering the sort of rhetoric we hear in some sort of political campaign. He was offering a very direct proposal. If you come and you stay here, this land, yes, will be yours, but not just on top of that. I've already founded various towns. As a matter of fact, I'm willing to lie. I'm gonna tell you that the Waldorf family has given me $25K to start what would then become Langston University. Yeah. They didn't. The Waldorfs did not write him a check. I checked. I checked multiple times, right? That like, he was like, I'm going to engage in the rough and tumble nature of politics and politicking. And so to some extent, like, yes, he wanted it to change, but he also thought for himself, like, I'm going to engage in the system that's there and radically kind of burst my way in such that they can't deny me. I want a constituency so powerful that I can't be denied. I'm going to start newspapers aplenty. I'm going to recruit people. I'm going to start arguments. I'll happily leave the Republican Party and become a Democrat, which he did, and then I'll leave the Democratic Party and become a Republican. Yeah. And then I'll say, like, look, I'm just going to Canada, and then I'll come right back, right? I'm willing to do it all. Yeah. And so, like, how does it resonate today? Like, I don't feel like, and this was something that Ashley Farmer was saying. She was like, I don't feel like either one of our subjects would have accepted the terms as they are, but that wouldn't have excused any of them for also still pushing the lofty goals, but like creating the plan, working said plan, being willing to change and adapt said plan, being willing to play very ugly and tough politics, to not be squeamish about the offense that it might have with those who might not agree. So to some extent, I feel as if like what what McCabe tried to do with Oklahoma was, yes, as radical as it was pragmatic, and to some extent, the radical components of it are actually suffused in the pragmatism. And some will disagree, right? And I've had that discussion with many a person, some people who read it before, some people who have read it now that it's out, who disagree. And so for me, I don't know, I think that what resonates so much with people is that he just tried in a way that was accessible to people. It wasn't a bunch of, lofty goals and high-minded talk. It was, this is what we're going to do, and we can do it.
Yeah, thank you. I want to bring us back to New England.
Okay.
It's one of the places where you talk about some of these efforts that, particularly in Oklahoma, right? And one of those things I think are very intentional for 12th Baptist Church, right? The Anthony Burns case.
Yep.
I want to explore, because I think you did a great treatment of the Burns story. We tell that story a lot around 12th Baptist Church.
I would imagine.
Because it is a story that speaks towards, for us, what the gospel looks like in real time. How do we deal with moments of, difficult issues? But I think the story also sort of exposes Northern complicity.
Yeah, of
and
course.
slavery, and how it shapes Boston, but also shapes some of the folks who would be considered some of our white liberal allies,
Of course.
in this work. And so if you could kind of talk about the importance of that story,
Yeah.
and particularly as we talk about some of the ties to some of the efforts that arise out of the Burns story.
Yeah. I mean, again, I had no intention of telling Anthony Burns' story. Again, the goal was McCabe astride a horse getting shot at, which is where the book does start, right? There is a very typical, American Western, people getting shot at, you think you're in a saloon, that whole thing. So you'll get that.
Yeah.
But it was annoying to me. I'm like, why would this relatively bougie black guy from New England find himself in Kansas and then Oklahoma? How did we get there? And that was my obsession for several months. So anyways, I spent time with wondering, okay, so he was pretty tight with he even named some streets in Langston, Oklahoma, like New England and Massachusetts and Lawrence. And I was like, well, these names come from somewhere, and they come from this particular incident in which people like Amos Lawrence would say, and I'm going to paraphrase, we went to bed, weak-kneed abolitionists, and we woke up radical ones, right? And you're like, really? Did you? So essentially, the Anthony Burns case was like Boston's, I'm not trying to be reductive here. It was like Boston's, George Floyd moment, right? In part because black guy, Anthony Burns, he had learned how to read. 1850, says, I'm done with this Virginia thing. I'm coming up to New England. He comes up to Boston by way of essentially having to stow away in a ship. He gets to Boston. He's working. He's living. He writes a letter because he can, which, he can, to his brother to tell him, hey, do you want to come see what this is about? This is the way to make it happen. It's then intercepted by his former owner, Colonel Settle, and that's when all hell breaks loose. He dispatches some marshals to try and round him up, and it just shocks. It just, it's a pearl-clutching moment for all of these, white New Englanders who are like, oh my, but, jumping Jehoshaphat, what do we do now, right? Golly gee willikers, what do we do? Anyways, people are shocked and alarmed that such a thing could be taking place. And, Henry David Thoreau writes this speech, and he's like, slavery in Massachusetts. And people are like, oh, yes, this is true. Now, what was interesting when you read the records, you see, Pastor Grimes, who was pastor of 12th Baptist, founding pastor, his response was very similar to, what I would think my response would be in those moments, which was oh, okay. Welcome. Did you not know that it was bad here? Anyways, but the choice then becomes clear. So Amos Lawrence is an example, who Lawrence, Massachusetts is named after, which Lawrence, Kansas, where University of Kansas is named after. Incredibly wealthy. He was residing in a very beautiful home in Brookline. He says, a lot of my money is tied up in the South. He was a textile expert, made tons of money And so, of course, he sourced the cotton from the South, came up to the North, and he had that moment where he had asked himself, like, well, am I going to really join in this abolitionist movement, you know, with his buddies like Eli Thayer? And, you know, they say, they do the equivalent of, let me put that black square on my Instagram account for solidarity, and do nothing else, right? And his way is, look, I'm not interested in getting crossways with any Southern planter. Not doing that. I'm gonna keep on, business will be good.
Still gotta make more money.
Right? I'm also not interested in doing like some missions to the South to grab a bunch of black people and bring them up here. Can't do that. What about the American West? We're gonna make our stake making sure that slavery does not make it to the American West, specifically Kansas. That becomes his shtick. And so he starts to finance these efforts to ensure that white people, in particular white New Englanders, in partnership with a guy named Eli Thayer, who creates the New England Immigrant Aid Company, to establish Kansas as a free state. When it is admitted to the Union, he's like, this sucker better be a free state. And so to some extent, like, he never, the creation of the West and the attraction of a lot of black people from the American South into places like Kansas had nothing to do with them and their abundance in mind. It had to do very much with them sidestepping the opportunity to stare evil at the face and do something about it. It was their opportunity to kind of look askance, to put that Instagram square there and then say, you know, we got y'all, right? I mean, wasn't that, well, I always tell this to my students, I always forget it. I teach a popular culture class, and I always ask, you know, the irony of Issa Rae in Insecure, the irony of the name of the company she's with, right? With a bunch of white liberals who are probably genuinely interested. They all work at a place called We Got Y'all, and they ain't got nobody, right? And so to some extent, I think like you see that play out. And I think maybe that's why that portion of the book is resonant, that that to some extent, even in the creation of quote unquote opportunity, the black people in this book had to kind of craft their place within the thing that was ostensibly nominally for them, but actually wasn't designed with them in mind whatsoever.
Yeah, no, I was really intrigued by the funding of this, right? You know, West becomes a solution for everything.
Of course.
Right? It's this unknown, right?
Yep.
And the unknown, we can all paint this canvas upon it and paint upon this canvas and begin to say whatever we want to say. But what it really proud of me, because I think, we all of us folks, we're in English and all these great things. You know, you get that Du Bois text, and you get the Negro problem question, right? That question persisted before we even get to Du Bois.
Sure.
And I think, it would do us justice to understand how that question still permeates today, right? That there is this undercurrent, if you will, around the Negro problem.
Sure.
The black problem. And now it seems in our context there's being weaponized, and we're still trying to use this narrative of Exodus in some ways, or promised land. How do we begin to reshape that?
Sure.
For our discourse today, because some of us feel like we need some other promised land in a land where we've been crying and shouting and fighting and blood, sweat, and tears.
Sure.
What does that mean for us right now?
Yeah, like even to like extend the use of biblical metaphors, right? It reminds me of when how can I sing a song
In a strange land.
In a strange land, right? You plotted me by the rivers of Babylon, and you expect me to laud, to what does it say? Like to play the harp and the lute and sing songs of joy in a strange land? Yeah, that's an easy question. That's me being sarcastic again. I mean, I think there are two things. One, when I first, so this is what happens when you write like a book for like a major trade press, right? So what happens is you end up writing, and you become as a rapper that I find corny, J. Cole would say, too deep for the intro, right? So like you just like spend.
He said that, not me, y'all.
You spend so much time almost being extraneous trying to like build out like this huge momentum. So when I first wrote the book, I thought I was gonna be really clever, right? So I wrote this whole thing. I remember I emailed my editor. I told him, I was like, hey man, I got something for you, right? And mind you, I said it just like that, I got something for you. And my editor is like a 70-year-old white man who wears Keds every day. So like, he was confused, right? What do you mean I got something for you? So I said, I'm coming. So I sent it to him. It's like 30,000 words, blood, sweat, and tears. Went to like a fugue state writing this thing. And I thought, well, you know what? I'm gonna write, black people in America always have to perform exodus before they can experience a new beginning. Yeah. I was like, that's deep. It sounded good. I felt like I think I want to call my dad and say that one would preach. Like that would get the people going. Like that would preach. So I sent to my editor 30,000 words, bloop, 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 right? And he emails me back. He's a fast reader, but this is 30,000 words. Mind you, this book is like 70,000 words. So I sent him a lot of words. Yeah. So sent it to him. He reads it. He was like. Hey, when are you in New York next? I was like, he's about to give me my Pulitzer. It's time, right? Like, it's go time. I was like, I'm there next week. So I go in person, and you always know by the fanciness of the restaurant how bad it is. So if it's really fancy, I would sip water, and there'd be a person, just making sure I was always taken care of, white cloth in New York. Yeah. And he has the 30,000 words. And my editor is Strange, love him, Jake Morrissey, shout out. He prints out each paper, each page on a single-sided piece of paper, and he pastes them on his wall at home, and he stands, maybe that's why he wears the Keds, and he marks each word. And he had the stack here, and there was a humongous X on it, and he said, I thought you wanted to change somebody's mind, but in no way is anything that you wrote in here clear. And he said the one sentence that appealed to me was not a sentence you wrote. It was that quote. We tried Washington, we tried Jackson, we tried, et cetera, et cetera. Every man is his own Moses now. He said, that's the one line. And in so doing, I ended up realizing that part of my problem, I think, at least in my own personal practice, is that I am in no way clear at times. And then I expect people to follow along on this journey to encounter all of this information that makes me feel very comfortable and makes them feel very uncomfortable. And I'm not even clear. Yeah. So I can't speak to like what the corpus of all black people in the world should be doing, but I would imagine that it's really much easier to sing songs of joy in a strange land when we can do so clearly, right? Because then only will it become some sort of clarion call, right? Yeah. And so to me, I think like, I had to sit there and like encounter the fact that he just told me everything I wrote sucked.
I hope the steak was good.
Yeah. I mean, it was a phenomenal lunch. Like, it was one of the best lunches I've ever had. Yeah. Oh man, y'all should write something really terrible so you can be taken to this restaurant. But it was in that moment that I realized that I have a tendency of lacking clarity. And so then my songs of joy in a strange land sound muddled. And so I think that's the thing that became clear to me.
Yeah, I give yourself some grace, man. You got to write it out, man. You got to get all that out before you can get to that clarity. I think that's a good place to transition to Douglas and Garnett.
Sure. Because
it's there where I believe we engage in folks who felt that they had a clear view and vision for how black folks should move forward, how should we at least fight in this moment. One is calling, Garnett is calling for this resistance in a very intentional and what I would think is very clear way.
Sure.
And Douglas has this hope for persuasion.
Yeah.
Both coming from very similar experiences, but coming to these different conclusions around how we move forward. What brought you to bring this conversation, which I thought was very necessary, to the book?
So it's thought that McCabe's pastor was Henry Highland Garnett. I told my wife that if we had kids in the future, I'd love to name, if we had a son, I would like to name him Henry Highland Garnett Gayle. And she told me no. I didn't preview this.
Another big red X.
Yeah, big red X. I previewed this for Imani Perry, and like my editor, she was like, no, She was just like, absolutely, why would you do that, Anyways, I think it's a great name. I'm doing this just to put a bug in her ear.
It's strong.
It's strong. It's got a lot of history to it. So I'll make my answer really short. So I mean, it's believed that Henry Highland Garnett was McCabe's pastor as a child in Troy, New York. Henry Highland Garnett, like Frederick Douglass, were both people who escaped slavery, and they were at the 1843 Color Convention, which, I mean, I love, and this is how I knew I was a nerd, I just love reading the proceedings of these meetings. Because, the notion of any sort of multiracial democracy that would ever have included them was so far away, but here they are practicing it.
Yep.
Right? That to me is that is rowing your boat when the ocean is too vast for you to even consider. They're actively practicing, they're debating. And the real point was they were going to discuss and debate what was the status of black people, specifically on the matter of education, economic development. I mean, who was being, anyways, we can talk about that another time. Again, another one that'll preach. But anyways, to make it very, very, very quick, Douglass is saying, look, man, Henry, I love the passion. Because Henry was like, look, man, there are 4 million of us, okay? You see that? You see that tool you have in your hand, that pitchfork you have in your hand, right? That sword, that machete that you're using for cutting, trees and such? It can be useful. And go up to your quote-unquote master and tell them that you're done with this. Quote back to them, in fact, the very constitution and the very declaration upon which this country stands. And if they don't relent, maybe you need to have a more physical conversation. And Douglass, who would get through eventually, was like, man, let's kind of. And I think that tension, which I think is still with us today, very much kind of, in my mind, was molding McCabe before he even knew it, right? And so that's why I included it, because I feel, that's the tension. It's one of many tensions that we feel today.
Yeah, I felt like that thread line, it runs throughout our civil rights discourse.
For sure.
Right? As we get to these conversations around radicalism and accommodationism, and we talk about, the ways in which we've kind of caricatured, right, King and Malcolm, and caricatured the Black Panther movement versus, SCLC and some of these other things. So I really thought, this clarion call of trying to figure out how do we deal with this.
Yeah, definitely.
Right, because this is a real thing, and you actually highlight a lot of what I would call vigilantism and violence as instruments, white racist vigilantism and violence as instruments, which, when you step back and you say to yourself, Douglass gets there, right? Some argue King got there. Did I walk my people into a burning house, right? And so, as we're thinking about the systemic reimagining, and I think, we'll kind of round it out here, how do we begin to wrestle in the tension of these particular ideas that I don't think are, static, right? You know what I mean? But the sort of, the underpinnings of those arguments are still present in our public discourse. Just go to Twitter or X, and God, you'll see a lot of arguments about how we should reimagine, how we should create new systems, and where do we position folks, particularly we Christian folks, we black folks in this country trying to work through it. We've always been very thoughtful and intentional about that. Those moments, those ideas collide.
Yeah.
What did you get out of McCabe and all these other great folks that you lift up in this book?
Yeah.
That helps us kind of find a pathway or throughway to this discourse.
Yeah. one of my favorite writers of all time is this novelist, Paul Beatty. He wrote the book The Sellout, which is one of my favorite books of all time. And he and Saidiya Hartman do this like talk sometimes. I was a visiting professor at Columbia's School of Arts in the MFA program, but I taught like nonfiction. And they kind of do this fiction thing where they talk about like my students are gonna like be annoyed because they heard this yesterday.
It's okay.
But like, you know, they both talk about like the difference between like describing a scene or creating a scene and world building. And so they, you know, the difficulty, you know, that Paul Beatty and even in his book The Sellout is that you have to, like, you're inventing new rules, right? You're kind of creating rules as opposed to just saying like, guy walks in the book, you know, I'm going to give away the book's conceit, but you know, he's trying to point, you know, he's doing a lot of very interesting things. One of the things he's proposing that black people be allowed to own slaves. Hilarious. You should read it. He doesn't actually believe that. There's an irony there that you should invest all of your time reading. But if you were going to do that, you're creating a new set of rules. So when I looked at McCabe, the moments in the book that felt like I finally had gotten somewhere was when, again, very exciting, he becomes a notary public. I was like, what was it? That's very interesting. And, you know, my poor wife would hear about, did you know that in 1876, he decided to become a notary public? She was like, great, you know? Or then I was like, you know, they decided to make Nicodemus the county seat of Rooks County, so they didn't have to take a train and a horse for 76 miles. She was like, amazing. And you know what's interesting? What's great about being married to, you know, you're married to a medical doctor as well. What's really funny is that, you know, they'll come home and she'll be like, oh, what did you do today? And I'm like, I found out that they figured out a way to get the train depot 5 miles closer in 1877. She's like, great. And I'm like, what did you do? Oh, we just cleared like 3 cases of cancer. You know, it's like, great. Yeah. Oh, okay. But like, to me, part of the reason I was so invested in these practicalities, these pragmatic moves on this really small level was because he was inventing. He was creating the rules and inserting black people into the creation of those rules. In a 1.5-year span, they helped roughly 1,300 black people get land property stores because they had somehow convinced the state that they were of upstanding enough character to be licensed as lawyers. And in short order started to rebuild this town in an image that they saw fit. For me, I don't know, I just take so much like inspiration from people who decide to do it anyhow. And I don't know if I have a good enough answer to the really wonderful question you had, except that what I found in McCabe that was so interesting, and a lot of the people that he worked with, was just, oh, we'll do it anyhow. Like, oh yeah, we can't do that here. That's a bet. That's great. I'm gonna do it here anyhow, right? I'm going to try anyhow. I'm going to try against trying. I'm going to hope against hope, and perhaps it might not work out, and perhaps I'll never live to see the quote-unquote promised land, but the 50 black towns that arrayed Oklahoma for a time were a testament to some of that work. The 13 that still live today, the traditions of the black rodeo, which I write extensively about, the traditions of even an HBCU in a place like Oklahoma that's reliant on state funding, but somehow, right, it still exists despite the many, many years of trying to do it in. And then the last part is, as you will find out at the end of the book, that these places are not the easiest places to get to, right? Like, you don't walk up to the Oklahoma Historical Society and say, I'd like to be directed to the Exodusters room, please, right? They laugh at you, which they did. Right? I would like to be directed to the McCabe files. What McCabe files, right? So you have to go to places like Nicodemus, Kansas, which you will find out took 3 flights. There might have been a barn that I stayed in for a little bit that had wasps everywhere. You know, a little dodgy, but in that barn or in under the cupboards and in places that you wouldn't find were these living documents, these testaments to history. And then you would also encounter people who were deep into their octogenarian years, holding up history, literally, quite literally, in some of their homes, or deciding that they're going to get these places recognized by the National Historic. Like, they're doing all of these things, and so it's in them that I see a tradition of trying when the world's forgotten about you, that still provide me such significant inspiration today.
That's good. Do it anyhow. We want to open up floor to questions. I mean, this has been a riveting conversation. I could do this all night.
He's a pastor, you should believe him.
And as the pastor, I can keep the lights on all night too until the security alarms come on. But we want to make sure we engage our audience who's been a part of this great conversation. First, let's give Caleb a big round of applause.
Thank y'all.
Only mistake he made was pledging alpha, so he's all right with me. But we have two microphones right here in the center aisle, and if folks want to bring questions, we open the floor to you at this time. Don't be shy. This is the Black Church. We're good at just pointing at folks because I know how this works. So please come with your questions. I'm sure Caleb has some great answers for you as well. Appreciate you, brother.
I feel like someone should start playing Just As I Am and say the church. Church roll.
Look, it's the hardest thing is to walk down that center aisle.
So start off, thank you.
Is it on?
Hello, hello.
There we go.
So honestly, it was J. Cole that did this for me, who I also think is corny.
He is.
Thinking of...
Yeah, try the other one, bro.
Test. Okay.
Thank you.
And thinking of the medium of delivery in terms of what you're saying, what's very important, and making sure that the knowledge that older generations, as you were just saying at the end, get to the people who really need it, who are the younger generations. What are your thoughts on transforming a certain type of media to something else to really reach a new audience and get people who would not be likely to read your book?
Yeah. Shame on them.
And another thing that made me think about this is because I was reading a news article recently, and it was saying that the Pope, he had a lot of different celebrities come over, and one of the people happened to be Spike Lee, and he was saying, in this time, the kind of things that you created needs to be created again, because that's not really in existence. So I'm really curious about, you've written this great book, but how many young people that need to read it are going to read it? And then what does it look like to transform that into something so people can actually engage?
Sure, yeah. So I think 2 or 3 really quick responses. One, the diversification of ways that people can get information means that we as people who care about this stuff need to be nimble, right? And so, until very recently, right, there was a great grant from like the National Park Service that was on our way. Not so much anymore. That would have essentially digitized a lot of the materials that people have, made it even that much more interactive. But then also, I've been very flattered and surprised by people's engagement with my work, and so some of that has meant that a lot of folks from Hollywood are really quite interested, not just in this book, but also in some other stories that I've written about these Black towns, which in many cases can reach far more people, right? If a book sells 3 million copies, it's a runaway bestseller, right? The book Let Them, have you heard this book Let Them? Or that book has sold 3 million copies. Crazy. If the average movie ticket is somewhere between $10 and $15, and you sell 3 million tickets, that's a stinker of a movie, right? So thinking about the ways in which we can extend the narrative is super important, and it's something that's constantly on my mind. It's something that we're doing. And sure, it's tough to see that, certain funders were no longer interested, but that just means that I need to be that much more nimble. And so we're still working with them. One story in there, you'll meet a guy named John Niles, who is a crook, just flat out crook, pardoned, a murderer, a philanderer, a cheater, but he also was the person who would convince McCabe and his best friend Hall to come to Nicodemus instead of going to where they were supposed to go. And so we are retelling his story with Vox, with the Criminal podcast, which has way more listeners than I will ever have readers, just plain and simple. So thinking about how to carefully break apart and extend the narrative is really top of mind for me. Yeah. So I appreciate you asking.
My question is this. The last part that you was talking about, it really did pique my interest. Because it seemed to be the oral type of history. It seems that you gleaned a lot of information in writing the book. And I know we're doing that work here. It's not a plug, but it is a plug.
Go for it.
We're doing a lot of work here in terms of oral history. Now the question, how much of the book did you get, the information that you get from the oral history, how much of it is really true or your imagination?
Oh, yeah. I love that question. No, I mean, it's, I think a lot of times, I teach students, so I'm gonna come in hot with like some like heavy academic speak for a second, and then I'm gonna follow it up with non-academic speak. So like one of my favorite historians is someone named Hayden White, in part because he's like, look, man, history is just, I'm paraphrasing, it's just a bunch of evidences and facts. It's up to you, the historian, or even anyone for that matter, to write the story, right? Someone whose book I read, Brandon Terry, who wrote this book, Shattered Dreams and Infinite Hope. I reviewed it for the Washington Post, and what I was so taken by was that he was interested in the story. Like, what is the story that we are telling? We can see things. What's the story that we're telling? So in many cases, like I have sometimes the same skepticism that you kind of express to the oral history to sometimes the record that I'm supposed to be taught, right? Because growing up, I was taught a very clear, like we used to sing at my university, right? If you watch OU, a dominant football team, I can't really speak to that. Northeastern doesn't do sports like that. I make fun of my students for that all the time. They don't do sports. But at OU, University of Oklahoma, we do sports. We don't do academics well, but we do sports. Okay? And so that, we scream, boomer sooner, boomer sooner. And that's the history we're told to embrace and celebrate. The boomers and the Sooners were like the worst people. Like they were the worst. We literally reenact the land run. Like there's a covered wagon that goes around while guys who are called roughnecks kind of hit people who don't actually exist, which are the indigenous people who were already there, so they could make their way into the territory that much further. And that's what sits on the record. If you try and go to the Western history collections at the University of Oklahoma, that's the story that you'll hear. So I'm very skeptical when I see anything. And I think that healthy skepticism is why sometimes those oral histories are actually the things that help me rethink the archive as I thought I knew it, the story as I thought I knew it, the history, the collection of these evidences and facts as I thought I assumed them to be. And so to some extent, I love when I'm sitting across from Angela Bates in Nicodemus, Kansas, and she says, I feel as if I can hear Edward McCabe, and this is what I think he would say about this. And I'm like, oh yeah, we'll go on that journey. Like, tell me more, right? So I honor and validate the stories that people have been holding on to as they've been orally transmitted from generation to generation.
That's important because we've been capturing, we lost 4 people from our Shaman Ab days in 1 month one time.
Wow.
And, some of them centenarians. And so we said at 12th Baptist Church, we're not going to let another generation go by where we won't capture on film and capturing them different mediums, these stories. Yeah. And some of the stories that we revealed at our big gala just a month ago, some of those folks are no longer with us.
Yeah.
And I say to myself, what if we didn't act immediately? You know, what happens for that next generation of writers, thinkers, activists, you know, educators? We lose some voices. And so I think it's so important that we're doing that real time. And even if the story is fuzzy, you know, we have a story, we have context, and we think it's important. So I think that's amazing that we're doing it. I think it showed very much so in the book. Sure. Are there any other questions tonight? Yeah, come on. You can stand in line, brother. You ain't got
First, I want to thank you for coming.
Of course.
Here.
Thank you for having me.
And we look forward to seeing you again in March.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you, Pastor.
That's our literary fellowship ministry. We got to celebrate our literary fellowship ministry here at 12th Baptist Church.
So I was particularly interested in the people.
Yeah.
And the impact that McCabe had on them. And so you did begin to speak about them and how currently, in today's terms, they're trying to make some of those things happen, even in the midst of what we call a failure. Maybe the state wasn't established, but there were some things that happened that I'm looking forward to reading about that would be called positive impact.
For sure.
Very much so, positive impact. So I wanted to ask you, what were some of the things that you found out that were most amazing and maybe even most relevant to what's happening today?
Sure. Yeah, I think the thing that I worked hardest on is a scene that is probably the shortest in the entire book, which is how it always goes. And it's the scene of McCabe and his wife Sarah getting married. And to me, it was worth every bit of it. I mean, it was worth every bit of it in part because they were doing something so kind of quotidian, or something that most would consider trivial. They were just getting married. But you'll see how it's orchestrated, how he makes it happen. But the reason is because, like, amidst it all, there was some semblance of joy. Like, you know, again, back to the Rivers of Babylon motif, like, how can I sing songs of joy? We saw it, you know? And it's beautiful. I mean, like, it's beautifully written. I'm biased. But it's as you see it, as you kind of, when you're in the records and you're seeing it unfold, you know, how it all came together, it's beautiful. I mean, it's literally everything. So that one, and then the other one was, there's a family named the Weems who were extra upset about the bug problem. Because you have to understand, like, they didn't have, think about this, you're in really far western Kansas. Colorado is closer than Kansas City. Like, you are out in the middle of nowhere. Trust me, it's nowhere. It's dusty, it's hot, it's got a lot going on. And so as such, there's no timber. Like, where are you gonna get timber from? The nearest train depot is 40 miles away. Where are you gonna get timber? So people are building homes out of dirt, out of limestone, because there's a lot of limestone, and they're putting these things together, packing it sometimes with spit, sometimes with whatever scant water you have, which just attracts tons of bugs. And so there's a scene where you see a lady walk through the house, jump from the front door onto a chair, shake off the bugs, take off her dress to put it into a bucket, and then would hop in bed with her husband after a long day work. I mean, like, they did it anyhow. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I just take such joy from that. And then, like, you see in another scene them having dinner. Like, it's just like, you know what I mean? Just what must be done. And so for me, I think those are the two scenes I love the most, because you saw joy not in spite of, but in the midst of.
My name is Bright. Congratulations.
Thanks.
It's a very hard work writing such a book. And there arose a Pharaoh that knew not Joseph. Yeah. And when that happens, you gentrify a group of people, make them suffer. And at the point you find out that you don't know how things work. So those who made things work, you want them to stay, but you've already gentrified them to the periphery. So they've forgotten people, that they've forgotten millions of that very thriving society. And the place is collapsing. This is existential crisis for both sides. And now eventually a Moses will come in. And so in these very current global context, I see a black Moses, which is on the table there, and you give voice to it. What do you hope these achieve? Because I still can, I thought that there is, there has arisen sort of a pharaoh. And we know what happens when that happens. So.
Yeah, I think what I hope to achieve is I really, because I think that there's a lot of places to go with that. We probably don't have
the time.
We don't have the time. There's even like some like almost, what's the word? Eschatological.
Yeah, eschatological.
There's some,
end time stuff.
But I didn't go to seminary.
We can go there.
I didn't go to seminary. I don't have a divinity degree.
This your work. This your
yeah. So I think essentially like the easiest way to put it is like if I'm thinking about it most simply, I think like I'm just hoping that I'm clear. There are a lot of ideas in the book, and at times I worry. I think it was like the New York Post called it one of their favorite books of the year. Real alarming, right? I was like, did y'all like see?
Who was in there reading that?
You know what I'm saying? Like it was me and Nicholas Boggs who wrote Baldwin. I'm like, these are not the books for y'all. But but I think my hope is that I'm clear and that my ideas, without me having to be didactic, can be seen in the narrative. That's my hope. That's like the start, because I don't. Again, I think maybe because I'm still fresh off of reviewing Brandon's book. Like I think there's so much more to be explored in story and narrative that I hope that my ideas are clear. This will be the last question, probably?
Yeah, this is it. I got my timer on.
Hello? Okay.
Hi.
Thank you for coming in today.
Sure.
Loved your talk. And I wanted to kind of ask more about your kind of philosophy around history and choosing a historical subject, especially since you've talked about your experience with history, how, in fourth grade it was kind of this dead and buried thing that was petrified, and this is what happened and so on. I kind of want to ask more about your idea of haunting the past and bringing it back to life and kind of dredging up through these archives evidence of a different history that goes against the grain of what you've been taught, that kinds of shrugs off the things that we've been taught. And I wanted to ask if your project in writing this book was to bring potentiality back to something that was seen as a failure today, during this time period, right? Like, we didn't know if it'd work, we didn't know if it wouldn't work, but there's this potential, and it seems like, from how I understand your philosophy, that you're bringing back a potential to where we might only see failure in the main story of history.
Yeah. I wanted to recast failure, first of all. I think that was like the most important thing. I wanted to play with it a little bit, in part because I didn't, as much, I think because I grew up in Tulsa, right? And you're hiding in the story of like the Tulsa Race Massacre, and then kind of the long project to kind of exterminate black people from that part of the state is hiding in plain sight, right? Like you walk, shout out to Nick, just want to put that out there, walk. When you walk, he talks a lot about walking, we'll talk about that later, but when you walk into what was formerly Tulsa's Black Wall Street, the 40 square blocks, back when I was a kid, you would just see like nothing, right? But the second you cross in, the average life expectancy back when I was a kid would shrink by 14 to 16 years. And then you would kind of take a left and see like some significant development, clearing. And now like where Tulsa is like the hippest, if you will, such that Tulsa can be hip, it is atop that, right? So I think part of the haunting the past was really taken from a person I was interviewing for the story that I wrote about the Tulsa Race Massacre for the New York Times Magazine. And he was like, look, man, he was so uninterested in talking to me. He was just like, look, man, what we do in Tulsa is we just build Tulsa atop dead bodies. It was like very matter of fact. He was like, we just build our future on dead bodies. So part of haunting the past is digging it up and making it such that it can't hide in plain sight. That the pure, unadulterated, misshapen aspects that make you feel uncomfortable is actually where I try and find beauty. And in so doing, the reckoning with it, whether we decide to reckon with it or not, like I want it to be so very clear, part of the reason I wrote this book, not just so people can look at the potentiality, but then to feel as if they too can do the same, that they can excavate those portions of our life and our world that we intentionally build atop of, right? That part, like I want you to feel that. I want you to feel uncomfortable, right? I don't feel uncomfortable, I feel great. It's great for me, but I hope that eventually you can migrate your way from the chill, the fear, the feeling of dread, of encountering a past that's not that far removed, that in fact is living amongst us today, and feel like you have every right to then ask, like, why do we continue, right? That was the second part of the question with this source. He was like, yeah, we build, but like, my question is for you, reporter, is like, well, why do we continue to just build our future on dead bodies? Like, why do we continue to do so? It's one thing if we did it before. So to some extent, I think, like, for me, it wasn't just the potentiality, it wasn't just the failure. The thing that motivates me to haunt the past is to, yes, provide a clearer path for people to haunt it relentlessly, and to do so boldly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you put your hands together for Caleb Gayle one more time?
Thanks, boss.
So we want to thank Northeastern University and thank all the work that you all did. I want to thank Caleb again. You're going to leave here bearing gifts. Caleb has already signed a book, and so everybody who's here will walk out of here with a book that's signed by Caleb Gayle. As we continue this work, we ask that you go with courage, with conviction. Be thankful that we were in community tonight, and most importantly, let us continue to do it anyhow. God bless you. Go in peace, and may the peace of God be with you all tonight. Have a blessed night.
I really appreciate it, man. Thank you.